This is my baby, my prized possession. I love video gaming. Every day I get home, I just want to play. So here I come, here I come, here I come. This is my final target. You wasn't expecting this, boy. I don't want to sound like I'm a future serial killer, but it's fun. Like when you drive a minivan through a crowd of people. Ooh, I hear your guns. Up in the guns. In the game world, like, you can get away with stuff. So cars, you can kill people. You're going at...
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Badillo. When analyzing the effects of violent video games on young children and teens, we must come to the question, to what extent is the continuing growth of violent video game usage in the United States affecting the expanding patterns of violence and aggression present in young children and teens? This, of course, would lead to my claim as being the continued exposure to violent video games has resulted in young children and teens being more susceptible to violence and aggression. Now, what exactly are video games? Well, video games are electronic games that have been used to form this kind of interaction with artificial stimulus. Video games have been used for entertainment for the past 40 years, ever since they became popular in the 1980s. Now, one thing about video games, they have a very diverse age group. There's not a specific age group under the video game. It can go anywhere from young children to grown adults as seen in these pictures. And video games can be very influential. They can influence people, and they can change the way people think, the way people act, and how people respond to certain situations. Now, how can they be influential? Well, they can be influential through social media. In an article written by Edward Kessler, he proposes that the social media has evolved from one-to-one connections to one-to-many connections, and now present-day many-to-many connections. This allows for video games to easily promote themselves while reaching a certain amount of people. Now, it can be either violent video games or non-violent video games. They promote themselves on platforms such as Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and so on. They can promote people, they can promote their ideas and tell people, oh, come here, let's play these games, and they are basically trying to entice people to play their games. Now, with video games being influential, they can be very accessible. Right here in this graph, we can see that a trend in children's purchase of restricted entertainment products from the year 2000 to 2012, the highest accessible entertainment product right here are the M-rated games. Now, M-rated games are recommended games for people of 17 years old or above. These games usually contain a high level of violence. They contain sexual content, blood and gory content, and foul language. Now, depending on the video game content, they can act as stressors. Stressors are something that causes you tension, anxiety, anger, or stress into someone. And with these video games acting as stressors, they can make the player want to release the stress or anger or anxiety onto something or even someone. In the video shown at first, that is a 12-year-old child. By playing video games, now he takes his anger out on doors, on his mom, or on a TV. He can do anything, basically. Now, not only do video games affect our behavior, but they can affect a child's mind. And this is proven by a study done by the University of Indiana. It was a medical school. And they did a research on how violent video games and non-violent video games affect the mind. And right here we can see the two differences between this was the non-violent video game group, this was the violent video game group. You can see how they affect different parts of the mind. And the research found that people who played violent video games, their amygdala was very active. Now, the amygdala is responsible for your fight or flight reactions in high stress situations. Keep in mind, high stress is proving that video games can act as stressors. And now, another thing that was found was that the frontal lobe was less active for people who played the violent video games. The frontal lobe is what keeps you from being aggressive. It's what keeps you from punching, throwing, biting, or shouting. Now, not all video games are bad. This is proposed by Jane McGonigal in the TED Talk, and she states that games like World of Warcraft give players the means to save worlds and incentive to learn habits of heroes. Now, this is actually found to be true. There has been research that has proven that some video games actually are beneficial to young children and teens. They can change the way they think, they can help them make decisions better, and they can just be very beneficial. They can also help with coordination and skills too. Usually these video games that are beneficial are the non-violent video games. Now, in conclusion, violent video games negatively affect young children and teens. They induce this type of violence and aggression into them. And the problem with this is that young children and teens usually, if they get introduced to this violence and aggression at a young age, they can take it out at a further age in the future. This could increase crimes and just affect the community negatively. Now, of course, there are solutions to this, one of them being restricting violent video games. Parents can restrict violent video games at a young age, if not the playing time as well. Now, of course, there exists limitations to this solution, one of them being lack of parental supervision. Many parents are busy parents. They are not home most of the time, and this allows for children to be home alone, and they can play whatever video games they want, whenever they want, and for however long they want. And another limitation is accessibility. As mentioned before, violent video games are very accessible, and as shown on the graph in the previous slide, about 90% of children are able to purchase violent video games. Thank you. What questions do you have?
All right, 2 questions for you, Jose. First up, how valid and reliable were the sources that you used, and then how did you know?
My sources were fairly reliable, and I know this because of the PACE and Raven test, and also I try to research studies like the Indiana University School of Medicine. I just try to stay on studies based on the video games and how they affect children.
All right, and if you had more time, what additional research would you do?
Well, I would definitely research how these video games later affect the young children in their life, like when they're adults, how do they act, and whether or not they become more violent